It was 2019. My wife Martha and I lived on a farm in Wolf Hollow, Montana. We'd been there for nearly 20 years. It wasn't a huge farm, but it was enough to live comfortably. We raised cattle and grew wheat. Our house was isolated, way out there. The road leading to our property was dirt, and it turned into slippery mud whenever it rained. Our closest neighbors were Calvin and his wife, June. Their house was about 1.5 kilometers to the south. It was a Saturday night. We had Calvin and June over for dinner. Martha cooked lamb, and June brought one of her homemade apple pies. We all sat in the dining room, talking and eating until nearly 10 o'clock. After that, we moved to the living room, had some bourbon, and chatted for a while. Around 10:30, Calvin and June said their goodbyes and headed home. Martha and I sat back on the couch, watching a movie we'd seen more than a few times before. An old one. We already knew how it ended, but we still loved it. We were relaxed. There was nothing about that night that suggested it would turn strange. About 15 minutes after Calvin and June left, we heard 2 knocks at the front door. Not loud, soft, but clear. Martha and I looked at each other right away. It was odd. Nobody ever comes out to our place this late, especially unannounced. I turned down the volume on the TV and sat still. A few seconds later, we heard the knock again. This time followed by a soft voice. "Hello? Anyone there?" I stood up. Martha got to her feet too, staying near the edge of the living room, not too close to the door. I stood behind it and called out loud enough. "Who is it?" A voice replied, "Sorry, our car broke down. We just need to borrow a phone." I asked, "Is it just you?" The person said, "Yeah, me and my wife. She's still in the car." Right away, I had a bad feeling. First, no one drives down our road randomly. It's not a public road. It only leads to our house. Second, the man sounded too calm. Way too calm for someone in an emergency. I asked again, "Can I talk to your wife too?" There was a pause before he answered, "She's waiting in the car." I stayed behind the door. Martha came closer and whispered, "You sure this isn't someone messing with us?" I actually thought for a second it might be Calvin playing around. He sometimes got silly after a couple drinks. So I said, "Calvin, is that you? If it is, it's not funny." The voice replied, "Yeah, it's me." But his tone had changed. It sounded deeper. That wasn't Calvin. I knew immediately it wasn't him. I pulled out my phone and called Calvin. I kept standing by the door as the call rang. When he answered, I asked quickly, "Are you standing outside my house?" He said, "What?" "Number, I'm in bed." "Why?" I told him, "Someone's here, pretending to be you, trying to get in." Calvin immediately said, "Okay, I'm coming over right now." I hung up. Martha moved quickly to lock the back door and check all the windows. We almost never locked up. Everyone around here knew everyone. But this night was different. A few minutes later, we heard footsteps on the wooden deck outside. I could tell it was 2 people. Their steps didn't sync. They were moving slowly. One of them tried the kitchen window. I heard the handle jiggle. Then, on the other side of the house, we heard something like a hand brushing against the dining room window. I shouted, "Get off my property right now or I'll shoot." One of them responded, "We just need a phone. We mean no harm." But I knew that wasn't normal. If they truly needed help, they wouldn't be sneaking around our house like that. Martha called 911. I could hear her telling the dispatcher that someone was trying to get into our home. The operator said deputies were on the way, but because of how remote we were, it might take a while. I ran to the bedroom, opened the closet, and grabbed the shotgun I usually kept for protecting the livestock. I went back to the living room and stood guard near the front door. Not long after, we heard a car in the distance. Then Calvin shouting from the front of the house, "Russ, "It's me. Open the door." I looked out the window first. It really was Calvin. I opened the door. He was holding a rifle and had a flashlight hanging around his neck. He was out of breath. "I saw someone run off when I hit them with the light from my truck," he said as he stepped inside. "They ran into the woods." The three of us sat in the living room waiting for the police. There were no more sounds outside, no more footsteps. About 35 minutes later, a sheriff's vehicle finally pulled up. Two deputies got out and started checking around the property with their flashlights. They found footprints in the dirt near the kitchen and dining room windows. No vehicle tracks, no tire marks on the road in. Just a single soggy cigarette butt beneath the side window. The deputies couldn't say much that night. They told us to install security cameras and replace the window locks. The next morning, Calvin and I drove into town to buy cameras and some extra gear. I don't know who those people were. To this day, I still don't. But I know they weren't just lost travelers. They knew how to approach a house without making much noise. They didn't just stand at the door. They moved around, tried the windows. They pretended to be someone I trusted. And if I had opened the door that night, I honestly don't know how this story would have ended. I was doing an internship at a small family-owned farm, about a 20-minute drive down Highway 36 from Belleville, Kansas. It was part of a fieldwork program from my college in Manhattan, Kansas. I'm majoring in agriculture. The farm was owned by a married couple named Bill and Karen, who had lived there for most of their lives. The property spanned about 100 acres, mainly focused on raising cattle and growing some corn. They lived in the main house, while I and two other interns, Jared and Tanya, stayed in a small cabin not far from the feed barn. My days were filled with the usual chores, feeding the cattle, checking fences, cleaning stalls, and occasionally helping Bill fix one of his old machines. It was simple, exhausting work, but it taught me a lot about real-life farm labor. One morning, about 3 weeks in, I woke up earlier than usual. My stomach felt a bit off, probably from dinner the night before. Jared was still asleep, and the cabin bathroom, tiny and kind of grimy, didn't seem like the best option that morning. I remembered there was an old barn at the far east end of the farm that used to serve as a field office. Inside, there was a decently clean bathroom. I knew because I'd helped clean it out during my first week. The sky was still a little dark, around 5:20 a.m. I walked past the pens and through the foggy fields and entered the barn. Everything was quiet, as usual. I opened the door to the small bathroom in the corner and stepped in. While I was inside, I heard the main barn door open. Footsteps came in. Then, a man's voice. "Hello." I froze. It wasn't Bill's voice. It wasn't Jared's or anyone else I knew. The footsteps came closer to the bathroom door. Then a soft knock. Not with a fist. More like someone tapping lightly with their fingertips. "Who's in there?" the man asked. I answered, "Intern. Just using the bathroom." "Ah, okay," he said, his tone oddly flat. Then he said, "Just got word a bull got loose. Bill says everyone should stay inside. Dangerous." I stood there silently. That didn't sound right. Usually if something urgent happened, like a loose bull, Bill would alert us through the walkie-talkies. And I hadn't heard any commotion outside. When I stepped out of the bathroom, the man was still inside the barn. His clothes didn't look like work clothes. Clean light jeans, a plain gray hoodie, and brand new looking brown boots. He was holding a phone, and when he turned toward me, he said, "Got the message from Bill's son. Said it was safer to stay in here." I'd never seen him before, and in all the time I'd been there, I'd never heard Bill mention a son who helped out on the farm. Then the man pushed a small metal trash can in front of the barn's entrance and said, "It's safe in here. You should lock the door if you can." I started feeling uneasy. "I'll check the radio," I said, trying to sound calm. I reached for my back pocket, pretending to look for my walkie-talkie. He didn't move. His stare stayed locked on me, sharp, strange, silent. I looked away and pulled out my phone. I quickly texted Jared and Tanya, asking if they'd heard anything about a loose bull. While waiting for a reply, I opened the university's website. They usually posted local alerts there, since they partnered with a few internship farms. Nothing. Soon, Tanya replied, "Nope. Just saw Bill by the cattle pens. Everything's fine." Then Jared replied, "What happened?" When I looked up, the man was standing much closer, only about 6 feet away. He said quietly, "Did you hear that?" "Footsteps. We should go back inside the stall. Hide." He extended one hand slightly, like he was trying to guide me back into the bathroom. That's when every part of me tensed up. Something felt seriously wrong. I suddenly shouted at the top of my lungs, "Bill! There's someone here!" His eyes went wide, panicked. Without saying another word, he shoved the trash can aside and bolted out of the barn. Seconds later, I ran out too, shaking, and headed straight for the main house. Bill was outside near the tractor. I rushed over, breathless, and told him everything. His face immediately grew serious. He called out for Karen and contacted the local sheriff. They arrived about 30 minutes later. After checking the area, they couldn't find anyone. The CCTV camera in the barn had been broken since spring. It hadn't been fixed yet. The police made a report and said they'd increase patrols around the area. The next day, the sheriff called back. There was no record of anyone matching that man's description working at any of the nearby farms. They believed he might have been scouting for empty properties or cabins like ours, which were easy to access. I finished my internship there, but ever since that day, I've never gone to the barn alone again. And to this day, I still don't know who that man was or what he really wanted. In the fall of 2019, I was asked to look after my uncle's farm located just outside a small town called Marshalltown, Iowa. The farm focused on broiler chickens, thousands of meat chickens raised in 2 large barns, all monitored by an automated system. My uncle and aunt had gone to Ohio for 4 days to attend a family reunion on my aunt's side. Since they didn't have any full-time workers who could stay overnight, they asked me to stay there temporarily. The job wasn't hard. Check the system twice a day, make sure the chickens were fed and had water on schedule, and report anything unusual. The first 3 days went smoothly. Every morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. to check the temperature and humidity controls in the barns, and to see if the feeding system was running properly. In the evenings, I just made sure the ventilation was working and cleaned the air filters. The rest of my time was spent in the main house, watching TV or reading books. But on the 4th night, something happened. Around 10 p.m., I was sitting in the living room playing on my phone when the barn system alarm went off. Short beeps and a red indicator light. The screen read, "Unusual movement, North Barn, Zone 3. At first, I thought it was just a glitch. Sometimes the system could misread things if the chickens got too active. But I decided to check it out anyway. After all, it was my last night there. I put on a jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and headed to the North Barn. As I got closer, I started hearing a commotion inside, unlike anything I'd heard before. The chickens sounded panicked, running and crashing into each other. The lights were still on inside, so I could see chaos through the windows. I entered through the side door and walked down the center aisle between the rows of chickens. Some feeders had been knocked over, and the back part of the barn was a mess, like something large had fallen or been kicked over. I immediately suspected a wild animal had gotten in, but the outer fencing was supposed to be strong enough to prevent that. I walked to the end of the barn to check the emergency exit that led to the field. As I got closer, I caught a strange smell, like gasoline. I pointed my flashlight at the floor and saw a shiny spill. Nearby, a gas can lay on its side. My heart started racing. That gas can didn't belong to the barn. The fuel for the backup generator was kept locked in a shed far behind the property. That's when I realized this wasn't the work of an animal. I took a few steps back and turned toward the door. That's when I saw a shadow move quickly past the small window in the barn wall. I aimed my flashlight at it, but the figure had already disappeared. Without hesitation, I ran back to the main house. I went straight to the storage room where my uncle kept a small rifle and spare bullets. I loaded it, locked the front door, and called the sheriff's office. I told the operator that someone had likely broken into the barn and tried to burn or sabotage it. They said officers would be dispatched immediately. While waiting, I kept watch from the window, gripping the rifle tightly. About 10 minutes later, I saw someone walking quickly along the back fence line. The person was wearing a dark hoodie and a cap. As I turned on the outdoor light and pointed my flashlight at them, they ran straight toward the trees. I didn't chase them. I knew the police were on their way. 15 minutes later, 2 sheriff's vehicles pulled in. I went outside and explained everything. The officers inspected the barn and found the gas can, spill marks, cigarette butts, and a few shoe prints in the soft ground near the back fence. After collecting evidence, one of the officers said to me, "This isn't the first time we've seen something like this month. There have been similar reports from a cattle farm up north. Seems like someone's targeting small local farms." The next day, my uncle came home earlier than planned after I told him what happened. As soon as he arrived, he had extra CCTV cameras installed, replaced all the locks, and reinforced the back fence with steel barriers. In the latest update from the police, they still hadn't identified the suspect, but they believed it was part of a string of sabotage incidents they were currently investigating in the area. I was thankful no one got hurt and none of the chickens were harmed. But ever since that night, I've refused to stay overnight on any farm, no matter how much they offer to pay.